So I want to have a brief conversation regarding the psychology of very intelligent people. Now, I want it to be very brief. Um, a deeply intelligent person is one who actually uses a tremendous aspect of their cognition, and they're very cerebral in the sense that they are able to think deeper and are able to follow sequences in their heads, logical sequences in their heads for much longer. But it's beyond logical sequence, because the developed form of the intellect is very emotional. I know most people don't like to think that the most intelligent people are very strictly rational and logical, but that's not really what it is. The nature of our cognition, of our rational intellect, is to metamorphosize into an overflowing of emotion. That is why the highest expression of the human sense of self-awareness is compassion. It's empathy. It's the highest expression of your brain, because it's a projection into something that is truly infinite and divine. But when you're someone who actually is able to think deeper and clearer than most people, and that translates into an overabundance of the flowing of emotion, you experience something quite unique as a personality archetype, because you are in uncharted waters. I mean, I don't like the concept of IQ tests and all that, but if we have to imagine that, the higher you go in intelligence, the rarer it is to find people who actually can operate at that level. And the higher you go in this expression of self, the more rarefied it becomes. And so one of the things that typifies these high levels of cognitive functioning is isolation. Very intelligent people don't have many friends. I don't even know if they have any at all. Because friendship is all about interpersonal relationship, and something comes with increased levels of intelligence that overflow into that abundance of emotion and compassion, right? Is that such individuals find it very difficult to relate interpersonally. And the higher this goes, because it really is like an engine that goes, the deeper you can think about the nature of awareness and the nature of self, the wider and the grander your cognition becomes. Then, if you understand the process astrologically, you see that out of that emerges something you can only describe as an ego. And egos don't do very well in interpersonal relationships. In fact, the very recipe for the construction of interpersonal relationships is derived from the attenuation of the ego. So the more your intelligence increases, the more difficult you find it to actually go into interpersonal relationships. It's not a coincidence. The very concept of the lone genius is not something that is not a cliche. It is the reality of the psychology of that type of development. Okay, because how many people are you going to be able to relate with? You see things from a very different perspective, from a unique perspective. How many people can relate with that? And so it is very important that people who find themselves in this kind of, because you don't really make yourself into that. It is what you are or what you ain't. Okay, and training and study and all that only brings out what is already there, the capacity that is already inherent. And so it is very important for the emotional well-being and the psychological well-being of such people to find ways to engage in community. And so it is important to develop a community of like-minded persons where, because isolation simply means that you cannot express yourself, and you have no medium, you have no vehicle, you have nothing. And so you tend to feel a sense of self-isolation. But in a communal, collegiate kind of environment where you are able to mix with like-minded people and share ideas, then the only problem becomes ego. I mean, have you ever tried working in an institution that develops knowledge? I mean, the egos are huge. And part of the problem with working in academia is that you have these grand egos, and we're talking about egos the size of planets and solar systems. Truly grandiose things. It's a consequence of what's going on within the cerebral cortex of these people, the type of way they are plugged into awareness. But you see, at the end of the day, the highest intelligence will always have that uniqueness of humility. It is the humility to learn from nature, the humility to understand, to plug into nature, to follow the intricacies of the delicate matrix of nature as it fades away into nothing. That's really what it is. And so there is a unique love that most people who are mesmerized by nature and can follow it to its understanding, there's a humility that comes from that process. But when it comes to interpersonal relationships, the walls that are put up are quite huge. And so you have groups of people who exhibit high levels of cognitive functioning, greater than the average intelligence, and it is because such people, because they're not very good at interpersonal relationships and all that, they tend to form these groups. It's almost tribal in a sense, but it's not the way that we currently define tribes, because the tribal nature of such groups is really down to cognition, thinking style, thinking capacity. Okay? Then you see that in that sense, because the linking factor is really competence, intellectual competence, you see that these are Aquarian groups in a sense. That's really what it is. Okay? Now, the problem with these type of groups is that in trying to really, assuming the lone individual has not found, the group that they can actually relate with and associate with, then in that lone state, when they try to cultivate relationships with people, interpersonal relationships, that is when they're not being so damn awkward, right? They just look out of place. And because they look and feel out of place and they make conscious effort to try to fit in, people tend to dislike them. In fact, the dislike can border on just fanatical hatred, just unmerited hatred, just because, because from that level of cognition, when you open your mouth, it comes out, what comes out seems like bragging, or seems like, showing off, or seems like just, trying to make everybody feel like they don't know anything. But that's not what it is from the perspective of the intellectual person. They're just being who they are. But that's not how it is received. You see, communication is a two-way thing. And so the repercussion of that is that these people are hated. Even if they're not hated openly, when the opportunity comes, they are derided. And, one of the reasons why I'm telling this story is because I look at the Igbo people, the Igbo tribe in Nigeria, the people who are united by the commonality of the Igbo language and culture. They are hated all across Nigeria. If it really comes down to it, you can't really see the source of the hatred. It's what you describe as unmerited hatred. Now, I'm not saying that, the Igbos are more intelligent, but they tend to display a certain level of progressiveness in their thinking. That's enough to get you hated, because that progressiveness, that is an Aquarian ideal. The desire to better yourself, better your lot, to improve your stature and your future. The desire to want to increase your level of competence to match your aspirational desires and goals. That is quintessentially Aquarian. And so Igbo people tend to be, Republican by nature, not as a political party, but as a belief in the ability of mankind to take responsibility for the emancipation of his own stature. That's really what it is. And so there is a culture of industriousness, a culture of ability, a culture of competence, but that gives rise to the familiar problem of the ego. So when egos are very high, it is difficult to work together, because working together requires a type of structure where there can be a leader and some people can follow. And the leadership doesn't come because it is anointed, or no. The leadership is based on competence. The leader is the one who has the best interest of the group at heart in terms of competence. Because the idea of competence is that you keep moving forward. You keep progressing towards the best version of what you can be. That's really what it is. And people who have these type of aspirational goals, they don't make friends. Listen, have you ever seen a truth teller with a lot of friends? It's impossible. Human beings don't like truth. It's too jarring. It's too discomforting. Everyone loves a comforting lie, you know? Now, and so you find these people, the Igbo tribe in Nigeria, being heavily marginalized in almost all areas. And it's almost like they're expected to be something unnatural or unreal just to be liked and all that. And this baffles me. I wonder, why do I need you to like me? You know, the difference between, I remember I learned this from a Jewish rabbi. He says, the difference between a child and an adult is this. For a child to feel comfortable, it needs you to like it. So from a child's perspective, when you like it, then it likes itself. From an adult's perspective, if you don't like me, that is your problem. That's your cross to carry. I don't have to like, I don't need you to like me so I can like myself. That's the thinking of a child. So there's a certain level of independence of thought that comes with maturity. So I see the Igbo in Nigeria as a type of, they're still waiting for people to like them, people to give them permission. No. The unique thing about the nature of intelligence is that intelligence finds it difficult to form these communities and work together because of the associated egos. But if they can overcome that obstacle, then there is no limit to what they can achieve. And so, you take, for instance, right, the European Jews who created the modern state of Israel, right? They have this problem. They're very cerebral. They're very, I studied Judaic philosophy, not because I am into Judaism, but Judaic philosophy is very deep into human psychology. You see? So they're a very cerebral group of people. They like to think, and their aspiration is always forward. Doesn't forget about all the other things associated with that. And they have a serious problem. They face the same serious problem. They find it difficult to work together. Mistrust and the clash of egos and all that. But there's a solution which they use. And that solution is called the Torah. It's a cultural artifact that has been woven together. It doesn't matter how it was woven together for the purposes that it is serving. But it allows the people, it serves as a vehicle for the attenuation of ego. And that allows for greater communal relationships to form. And based on that, look at the world around you as a testament to the things that they've been able to achieve. I mean, you gotta look at this thing from a point of view of intelligence, really. You have to look at it for what it is. Forget about the religious aspects, or forget about all the other narratives, or just open your eyes and look. So you find the Igbos now, they've been, the way they've been treated in the country called Nigeria is just, it's so shocking. It's just beyond, you have all sorts of excuses, and people make all sorts of, listen, there is no excuse for hate. Just so that we're clear. There is no excuse for baseless hatred and wickedness and the implementation of these type of things. Now, how does it start? Hatred starts from a very simple twist in the deep psychology of a human. And that twist is denial. It is the entirety of what white supremacy is built on. It's a system of denial. And what happens is that the individual denies themselves by turning away from themselves because they perceive deep within themselves that there is something unworthy about themselves. So because the individual cannot accept who they are, they cannot accept the denial itself, even as a consequence of that process that is going on within them. So they project it. And they project it towards the interpersonal space, the place where you get to relate with other people. Because the reality of it is that the relationship with other people is a relationship with yourself. That's really what it is. One is just a projection of the other. And so that's what baseless hatred is. I mean, you can't hate a whole group of people. You don't even know them. How the hell do you hate them? But it comes out as a collective, as an experience of sort, as a projection of that lack of self-acceptance deep within the self. So you don't know how to relate with others. You don't have the maturity to be able to relate with others. So you're prone to envy because of that. Because envy is a result of that gap, that deficit of self-acceptance. That is where envy is cultivated. And that gap is called envy. But the real name of that gap is self-ignorance. And that is the root of all evil. This is something you know, something people will tell you money is the root of. Money doesn't have any natural connotation. The root of evil is deep within the psychology of man, and it stems from ignorance, self-ignorance, which is then projected as the ignorance of the other. And that gap, because that ignorance, because you don't know who the person is, you have no way to connect, to reach out, to see what that person really is. It leads to an unknown that is frightening or fearful, and then hate is used to basically assuage that fear. And then the hate is implemented under various guises and schemes. You know, human beings have found very insidious ways to implement hatred. They call it all sorts of things. You could call it countries. Oh, you belong to that country, I belong to this country. Or you do this, I do. You know, different schemes of differentiation. Wanting to keep this barrier between yourself and another, basically. So you call it all sorts of things. You call it border control, immigration. You call it all these things. Or you call it colonization or terrorism or whatever. These have different names, but it's all built on a system of hate that stems from a system of self-denial. A system of denial. Okay? And it's much deeper than that. If I go into all of this, your jaws are going to be on the floor. Because that denial does something to a human being that is just incredible to see. And so, now the Igbos have had, because of this marginalization and this pressure, because marginalization is simply just ostracization. It's trying to send you a message that because of the way that you feel so intelligent, you feel so smart, well, I'm not going to give you relevance in anything. And that is my way of controlling the sense of self that you feel, so that I can respond to that sense of self that you feel. I can respond to it with the opposite of that, so that I'm trying to tell you that you don't mean anything. And the only reason why I'm actively trying to do that is because I am afraid of what you mean. I cannot be afraid of what you mean if what you mean does not represent a powerful truth to me. Because if it didn't, I wouldn't care. I wouldn't go through the trouble of trying to prove anything to you. But the fact that you go through the trouble to prove to someone that they're not important, it means that they are so important. That's the reason why you are trying to prove that. You know? And the self, because it cannot accept this truth, it covers everything with a lie. And that is the nature of denial. You see the logic? It's much deeper. But I will be shallow in this podcast. I don't want it to go too deep because it's really targeted at my Igbo brothers and sisters. Because I see the marginalization that they face in Nigeria, and it's heartbreaking. I understand why white supremacy does it. But you're all black people. You're all facing the same pressure from white supremacy. What the hell are you doing? Okay? Now, you see, all of these things were triggered by white supremacy because white supremacy created these colonial countries. And these colonial countries were not constructed according to ethnic or tribal fault lines. They had no relevance was given to the already existing ethnic architecture or tribal architecture that was on the ground through which the people have lived for thousands of years. The Europeans just came and just lumped groups of, just disavowed all of that. Those structures contain the intelligence, the wisdom with which the people have been able to live and thrive together for a long time. But obviously the Europeans, They're a very extremely young group of people. Forget the aggrandizement that they've been doing to themselves. There's a lot they don't understand. And so they didn't see these already endemic structures that were on the ground, that we had won through centuries, maybe even thousands of years of coexistence. And then they came and they destroyed all of that. So now what you have is ethnic tension. Because why? Now, people tribe when they are scared, when they're spooked. That's the nature of human psychology. When you find yourself afraid, you tend to look for security in familiarity. That's what people do. Animals do it too. But human beings, because they are sentient, they tend to transcend that. That's the natural nature of your cognition. Now, when you are afraid, you abandon the topmost layer of your brain and you start responding to much deeper structures that are basically part of your limbic system in your brain. You start responding to your amygdala. And then you begin to tribe because you are afraid. So you look for safety in the herd. So you revert back to a more primitive aspect of yourself. And usually these type of behaviors emerge when scarcity. But scarcity is something that is created. It's not something that exists naturally per se. Because every, bioorganism will, even in their collective, will come to a natural cohabitation with their ecosystem. A natural balance. And so scarcity really represents that black swan in nature from time to time. And it usually serves a purpose. But since the advent of modern economics, scarcity is something that you can create when you have a little bit of influence. And so the creation of the colonial countries in Black Africa began to cultivate scarcity. So now, because the Europeans basically created these structures to loot these countries of their natural resource and all other forms of resource for their own purposes. That's really what it is. And because these colonial boundaries and structures and countries were created without respecting ethnic or whatever tribal fault lines that have been in existence for a long time, and the intelligence of being able to nurture those fault lines such that peaceful coexistence had been going on for so long, then invariably tensions began to rise, because now you're dealing in a European type of system, a country, and the country has resources. For instance, in the Nigerian whatever, the southern part of Nigeria is more resource rich than the northern part. But the colonial projects, the colonial aggressors, or whatever you want to call them, I just call them colonial terrorists, because terror is the only means that you can control. You can demand that people give up their sovereignty to someone that has no affinity to the location. It's terror. You can't do it without terror, okay? Because you don't come as a benefactor. You come with guns, okay? And so when they were granting quasi-independence, because that's what I like to call it, because there really wasn't any kind of independence, they granted that independence under so many formal and informal conditions, such that the northern, less resource-rich part of the country was literally handed over control of the country as the only condition for participating in that country. And the reason for this mismanagement or abuse of power by the colonialists is because crude oil had been discovered in the southern part of Nigeria. And the colonial oil company wanted continuous access to be able to exploit that. So they needed somebody to say yes in the government system all the time they come calling. You see? So the entire foundation was already very unjust and faulty. And since then, the Igbos have been marginalized. They can't break out of this system. They cannot be their natural self. And when you cannot be your natural self, you cannot aspire. You do not have the means to aspire. And like I told you, the thing about intelligent people is that they have tremendous aspirations. It just comes natural with the tough, It's something that comes natural to you. You have these aspirations, and all these aspirations are driven by a vision. But when you're not allowed to be that vision or to pursue that vision, then it's like something has been taken away from you. That's why the Igbos have been looking to leave that country for many decades now, to break away, to pursue their own destiny. But the colonial project has always said no. And the colonialists, the terrorists, have always supplied the colonial government with weapons to kill the Igbos. So they cannot break out, they cannot be free. And yet they are not allowed to express any aspect of their ambition or their aspirations within the colonial country. So it's a prison of some kind. You know, it has no bars and doors, but it's a prison nonetheless, because you cannot express those God-given aspects of yourself. You cannot materialize any one of them. So you are stuck in this frustration. And if you agitate, the colonial government kills you. So why am I telling this story? And for the last few years, the Igbos have been agitating for a referendum to be able to leave Nigeria. Listen, that's not going to happen. Referendums, you have referendums conducted in Europe here. When the United Kingdom wanted to leave the European Union, they held a referendum. That's because from their perspective, they are sentient beings amongst themselves in the United Kingdom. They assume themselves to be intelligent beings who talk to each other, who practice democracy and all. These ideals are not reserved for Black Africans. Black Africans have been dehumanized from the very beginning of what you consider to be white supremacy. And so the idea of black people having referendums to decide or to have a democracy and all that, white supremacy will not allow black people to practice these things, because those things suggest that they are on the same level with their European counterparts. And the entire essence of white supremacy is that it constantly preaches that black Africans are inferior to the group that became defined as white people. This is an invented group. There was no such thing in the 14th century. And so, in order for the colonialists to control this region, imagine a small country like the United Kingdom controlling hundreds of millions of black Africans. It's ridiculous. This goes beyond the gun. They cannot do it, even no matter how well armed and well provisioned the army is. They had to do it through proxy, local proxies, black Africans themselves. And that's exactly what they did. They cultivated a system of divide and rule, divide and conquer. And that's easy to do in an environment where you have these tribal and ethnic fault lines. You just need to convince the other starving black African that his equally starving black African brother is the reason for his starvation. And if he can get rid of him, then he'll have more for himself. Now, the whole thing doesn't dawn on the black African that the person who's suggesting this really is the one complicit in setting brother against brother. And that's because when you're in a very low vibrational hunger state where you are fearing for your life, you're tribing. You have the strong affinity for the tribe, and you're not really reasoning because you have abandoned those levels of your cognition due to fear. And nothing brings you down to earth faster than hunger, starvation, and where you are afraid for your life. And that's why I call colonialism a terrorist project. Colonialism is just a fancy word, but the real thing is terrorism. And so, for my Igbo brothers and sisters, the only thing I got to say is this: you cannot be asking for a referendum in Nigeria. You also cannot be looking to fight the Nigerian, the colonial state, because the history has proven that it doesn't work, because they are well armed, well provisioned, and the colonizers supply very lethal weapons. And the last time the Igbos agitated to break away, 3 million Igbos were genocided between 1966 and 1970 in Nigeria. And because of that, they were stripped of all rights, literally all rights, because they wouldn't allow the Igbo man to lead. They wouldn't allow him, aspire. They wouldn't allow him trade. He wants to do business. He wants to grow. He has aspirations. They wouldn't allow anything. And if he complains, they will shut him down because, So it is oppression. There's just no way to talk about it. And it is something that is very unique with groups who exhibit a higher than average level of intelligence. That's why I started the conversation from that point. Now, you look at the European Jews and you say, look, but this is a problem that has been unique to them all over their sojourns in Europe. They were basically massacred in all the European countries and expelled and genocided and murdered en masse. I mean, if once any problem emerged in any European country, these people were slaughtered like sheep. I mean, you don't even slaughter sheep that way, you know? And so when they saw the opportunity for a country, a land of their own, they took it. It doesn't forget about the ways in which they achieved that, you know, and all the hurt that has cost. But you know what drove this literally is desperation. Okay? Because you realize that at some point in time you cannot continue to negotiate with your oppressors. Oppressors by their very nature do not respond to reason. Bullies, you cannot talk a bully out of, you know, the only way to stop a bully is through standing up to that bully. I mean, this is something you learn when you're very young. So what is the way out for the Igbo? Now, the European Jews have something going for them, like I told you. It's not their system of organization. It's not the fact that the American government supports them with billions of dollars every year and they have this high-tech, whatever. No. They have the Torah. And if you don't understand the significance of that, then I cannot explain it to you in this podcast. Because that will require, you know, hours and hours and hours of explanations. Now, I'm not saying it's some type of magic bullet, but what I'm saying is that it is the essence of a cultural heritage. Now, I'm not going to go in because there's a lot behind all of this, where the Torah comes from, who designed it, who wrote it. Forget about all that for now. I'm talking about what it has been used for. There is an identity that attenuates the ego. Talk about mitzvahs, for instance. You know, get a bar mitzvah for the males at 13 years old, and those who are observant, and even those who. But at the end of the day, because they're prone to violence from others, basically, you know, I'm not saying that they're 100% innocent in any of these things. Okay, nobody is, but it doesn't stop the fact that you can identify them as a group of people based on that religion and then project violence on them. Okay, now history has demonstrated that, so there's no need to go into that. But the Igbos also face such problems. It's the story of Nigeria is the story of the projection of violence on the Igbos. It is what it is, and I'm you know, the Igbos are called the Jews of Africa, but that's a misnomer, really. The linkage between the two sects is the fact that they have these intrinsic aspirations that are driven by competence and intelligence. And that's what drives the desire to be better, the desire to know more, the desire to be wiser, the desire to think farther, and to invest time and resources in raising yourself up through the competency of your own efforts. That's really what it is. Okay? Because that is driven by intelligence. And when you do that, you find that even as a singular individual, just try it out if you can. And then you see what the effects are. It's isolation. It's hate. It's ostracization. Now, some people say intelligence also comes with the emotional awareness to be able to interconnect with others. You're just fooling yourself. That's a social type of intelligence. Yes, there's some people. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the ability to chameleon shift into different modes of expression so as to be able to match whatever your surrounding environments are. That's a survival strategy. And it is driven primarily by a need to assuage your oppressors so they don't pick on you. It's a survival strategy. But I'm talking about the type of intelligence where you don't need to assuage anybody. You don't need to sell ice cream to anybody. If you don't like me, then that's your problem. That's your headache. You deal with it. It has nothing to do with me. But if you bring your hate towards me, I will destroy you. But I won't come looking for you. I have no problems with you. You don't threaten me. You don't frighten me. You know, Just nothing. I don't need to set strategies to contain you or whatever, because I'm comfortable on my own. I'm comfortable in myself. If you are going to grow and aspire, well, that's good for you. You don't represent a threat to me, because that is not the way I define your rise and your growth does not threaten me, because that is not the way I define my reality. Okay? And that comes from solving the issue of self-acceptance. Now, the European Jews call themselves the chosen one, the chosen ones of God. What does that sound like to you? What does it mean to assign that label, to say, look, we are a special people? What does it mean? Forget about what it means religiously and all that. I want you to look at things for what they really are, or for how they look, assuming you don't understand anything. You see, being special is a sense of self-significance. Self-significance. It means that you have a purpose. It means that you have a reason for being. And that's a very empowering situation. And when you are empowered like that, what is empowered from that type of, or that level of self-significance, is the ego. But now the ego is empowered in such a way that it now becomes subservient to a much higher purpose. That keeps it in check. And in order to seal that deal, you have these operations called mitzvahs. Now, each mitzvah is specially designed to attenuate the ego, so that it doesn't run amok. By attenuating it and bringing it down in subservience to something higher than yourself, the ego is kept in check. That way, the people are able to enter into relationships with each other to form a much larger group. And that way, as a collective, they are able to wield influence. Now, this message really is directed to my Igbo brothers and sisters. That you spend time asking your oppressors for all sorts of things. Running around asking them to like you, asking them to grant you a referendum, asking them, and then when they hesitate because they are oppressors, and they say no, and you start carrying guns and trying to look for who you're going to fight. This is ridiculous. Because by doing that, you are basically negating the greatest gift that you have, which is your intelligence. Your intelligence. Do you realize what intelligence does to a human being? Intelligence is what makes you pick yourself up, dust yourself up, take off your rags, take a shower, make yourself look good, presentable, because the image that you have of yourself in your head is also part of your intelligence. And then your intelligence begins to work out how to get from where you are to where you need to be. That is the nature of intelligence. You don't need to ask nobody for anything. Now, the reality has demonstrated that every objective can be achieved in a sense with the judicious application of a strategy. The executive function, the planning function. Now, I'm not saying you should go do harm to people as part of your strategy, and because you do that, you're going to get the karma for it. And part of intelligence is recognizing that that's not the way. That's part of intelligence. What I'm saying is, my Igbo brothers and sisters, you need to fall back and to realize that if the ego can get you out of that, it would have already. It can't. The ego needs to be attenuated so that community can emerge. And when community emerges, then anything is possible. Don't you understand the reason for the hate? It's not really hate, it's a projection of fear. It's envy, it's jealousy. That's where these things come from. Stop pretending that you don't know. Stop being boastful and bashful, because it doesn't achieve anything. You find your oppressors taunting you, telling you, hey, it's because you don't want to come and work with it. They're not ready to work with you, at least not as equals or as whatever. And Personalities like the Igbo and the culture, what they represent, they cannot be subjugated. To subjugate them is to take away the essence of what they are. I want you to understand what Aquarius really is. Okay? For those of you who don't know astrology, the astrological symbol for Aquarius is a human being. It is the only zodiac sign that has a human being as its representative symbol. All the other zodiac signs are animals or things. In fact, the word zodiac really is Greek in a sense. It means animals. Aquarius is uniquely different. It's really talking about and speaking to the essence of a human. And what is that essence? That essence is the light of conscious awareness, which is what intelligence really is. And those who have this light the brightest, it shows up in the way that they behave. Because they represent the future of humankind. They always carry that seed for the future of humankind. That's why you look at a country like Nigeria. The only people who can move it forward from the retrogressive stagnation that it has always been are the Igbos. It doesn't matter what anybody says. I just laugh at them because you don't understand what you're dealing with. If you don't understand what you're dealing with, then you have no idea where you are or where you're going. The country cannot make any progress to what? As what? Without the Igbos. The Igbos are the ones that move things forward. Don't take my word for it. Just run through all the Nobel Prizes for the last, 100 years. A good percentage of them are European Jews. It's not because they, somehow, no, it's because of the application of this type of thinking. You see, in order to be able to move forward as a collective, you must solve the basic needs of mankind. So you can start tackling the big questions. You cannot be thinking about the nature of the universe when you're fearing for your life. Okay? So first you need a security architecture. Security revolving around the basic needs of existence. And you only achieve that as a collective. You cannot have a collective if you don't have something that attenuates the ego. I've just given you an example. In the European Jews, it's the Torah. Now the European Jews, they have that, they also have this closed whatever, because for instance, they don't like black people, black Africans. They really don't like them. They consider them to be inferior intellectually. So they set up the modern state of Israel as a type of European white country or something like that. So, but that is a quirk, that is something that comes from the way that they have, the pathways that they have chosen. Nobody's perfect, you see. So there's always something to improve upon. They need to improve on that, because the Torah which they study, the essence of that Judaic philosophy which they study, it's all about blackness. So I don't know, there's a reconciliation somewhere in that timeline. But I'm sure they'll get to it. But as for the Igbos, it's not about feeling marginalized or feeling powerless or feeling hopeless within the Nigerian. To feel that way is to basically resign yourself from your collective gift. You want to, putting it very simply, you want to know what your collective gift is. Your collective gift is the ability to think deeper, faster, quicker than anybody else. Don't ask me why, because that's not something I'm going to go into in this podcast. And the fact that somebody is not Igbo doesn't mean that the person cannot exhibit that. I'm actually speaking as a collective. Now, the Igbos exhibit this in the area of trade and commerce. And it's not because Igbos love money more than anybody else. No, they recognize the importance of money in the fight for survival. And because they're a group that has always been marginalized and ostracized, survival has become important to them. We're talking about people who have faced genocide. They say the European Jews love money a lot. But excuse me, when people are always trying to kill you, what do you want to do? How do you safeguard yourself? How do you keep yourself safe? How do you preserve the love of your families? And no one wants to see their loved ones slaughtered. So what are we talking about here? These are just nonsensical tropes, okay? That's really what it is. Now, look, like I said earlier, my focus is this intellectual dispensation, okay? I'm not talking about anything else. Now, my people, the Igbo people, they suffer from this type of thing, and they do not have that collective unity. It's all man for himself, and they work at cross purposes to each other. And you wonder why. Well, it's very simple. Capability and competency and capacity is measured individually in the Igbo tribe. So each person is always trying to outdo the other. But what I'm trying to tell you is that as an individual unit, you cannot achieve much. It's just the nature of human psychology. But as a collective, there's nothing you cannot achieve. But you cannot have a collective of intelligent people with egos all over the place. I mean, these are some of the largest egos you will come across. They cannot work together if you do not have something that binds them together towards a common or a higher purpose. So it is the process that takes the ego and sacrifices it for the greatest or the greater good. You don't have that process in Igbo land. You have different subcultures, different languages. In fact, you have different parts of Igbo land that don't mix with each other at all. Each person, with different cultures and, all sorts of things. There is no unifying criteria. I want people to understand, based on what I'm saying, I want you to understand what the Torah signifies. What a cosmogony signifies. What a sense of self-significance signifies. Without it, you're like a sheep in the ocean, rudderless, drifting, nowhere to go. And if you're facing onslaughts from different people because of the way that you are different, then you see that the situation is dire. So it is left for the people to internalize this, to ingest this. This is serious. This is not a joke anymore. There's a reason why. Because whether you like to believe it or not, God, the Elohim, controls every aspect of existence, right down to the tiniest atom or subatom or molecule. It is not a coincidence that most of the times humans don't believe, they cannot prove this, they cannot see, there's nothing that seems to be able to prove this. But that is the difference between where we are and where our cognition is supposed to be. Because when that cognition is functioning the way that it's supposed to be functioning, this will become an explicit type of understanding. You see what the Torah does? You see another thing that it does? It doesn't matter what you think about it. What is its function? How does it behave? And what benefit? Now, it doesn't mean that all Jews all over the world, all European Jews are united in common purpose and all that. No, of course not. You see? But if you think, there's impairment, now just imagine the reality without it. Imagine their reality without it. They would have been decimated and wiped off a long time ago. Each person would have gone doing his own thing, and there's nothing that is as easy to scatter as people who are so disunited. Especially when you're surrounded by people who don't like you. See? You can give up that which makes you significant, so you can be like everyone else, just so you can find peace. Some cultures did that. Or you can say, look, if you don't like me, that's your problem, not mine. And then you can live with that philosophy. You're not setting out to hurt anybody, but you're not setting out to be oppressed by anybody either. You're able to hold your own. And black Africans face a global system of white supremacy that is an oppressive system that wants to keep them down. And the colonial British designed Nigeria as a prison for the aspirations of the Igbo. To lock them in is a containment system. That's why they had to they did everything possible to make sure that the secessionist movement that the Igbos started did not succeed. They slaughtered, you know what it is for 3 million people. How many times when you hear of genocides in the world, do you actually hear that reported? Most people don't know about this. 3 million Igbo children and women and men died from starvation, a blockade, food blockade, and then from violent kinetic energy. It's a horrible thing. How many are they? For this sizable chunk, and then all their properties and assets seized, because obviously the secessionist movement didn't succeed, so they were a conquered people. I need you to understand the psychology of this. It's almost like you go left, no way, go right, no way, go up, go down, no way. So what are you supposed to do then? They're still facing the same problems today. And different characters have emerged to say, okay, let's charge the asset. Listen, this is not a kinetic battle. You do not have the means. And it is foolhardy to engage in a campaign that you do not have the means. But there are other ways. Like I said, the nature of that's because here's the thing, right? If you find yourself in a place where you are not supposed to, or where you don't want to be, you can't do anything about it. It's because you're not fully aware of your true condition. It's a function of awareness. You don't really understand your problem. And the reason is because you cannot fully define your problem. Now, the day that you can fully understand that problem, the day that you can fully define what it is that holds you down and then understand it, that is the last day that you are held down. Do you understand? I mean, this is not magic or whatever. It is an absolute truth. That enslavement is a function of a lack of self-awareness. Bondage is a limitation of the mind. And the mind is limited by all sorts of reasons. Usually, the most significant aspect that limits the mind is when you have substituted knowledge for fantasy. You're focusing on the wrong things. And you do not have the courage to focus on the right things because you're held back with all sorts of narratives, fantastical narratives floating in your head about aspects or images of the world that have no semblance to reality. And so you are held back by fear. Fear is the one thing that holds an individual down. And so the challenge whenever there's fear is to overcome that fear. Not in a whimsical way, but in a practical, tangible way. And then to rise, because that is the natural state of affairs when you have removed that fear. Fear limits cognition. Because when you're afraid, you go hide. And you may not hide physically, but you definitely hide mentally. You withdraw. It's a withdrawal of self, basically. Okay? So, to my Igbo brothers and sisters in Nigeria, this is a sort of blueprint. The problem is, we need a system for the attenuation of ego. Astrologically speaking, right? The attenuation of ego takes place in what we call the 6th house of astrology, and within the sign of Virgo, it is the 6th sign and the 6th house. For those who have wisdom, let them understand what I have just said. Because within it lies freedom, if you have the courage for it. It requires letting go of that intrinsic fear, which is simply just a programming of the mind, and then to rise to the potential of your stature. Okay? Because you have to understand, because it comes from an understanding. It's a very basic one. If you pick any observant Jew and you ask them, they will tell you straight up without giving it a moment's thought. God controls every aspect of existence. There's nothing left to chance. There's no such thing as chance. I don't even know what that would look like. Okay? That's because they're constantly engaged in processes which take the ego and attenuates it. It's not like the ego is not there. It's there because they build up the ego with success comes, and with knowledge comes a grand ego. So it's not that the ego is not there, it is there. But the observation means that you subsume the ego to a higher purpose, and the highest purpose possible. Because the thing about human beings is that human beings stopped being animals a long time ago. Some people say some people behave like animals. No, animals don't behave anything like human beings, even in their worst state. All right? Animals are pristine and pure. They're always very true to their nature. They cannot be anything else. When a human being begins to behave badly, they behave worse than animals. Now, when a human being is functioning correctly, the highest aspiration of a human being is towards the grandest of meanings and connections. That's where your compassion comes from. That's where empathy comes from. Okay? So community. Because now, Pluto is going into Aquarius.